I know that the free agent period has been polarizing, let's say, to a lot of Blue Jackets fans, but they had a quietly very solid draft last weekend. So let's dig into that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. So, lots of up and downs in Blue Jackets world the last couple of days. I feel like the pre-draft trade polarizing. The draft itself, I think, was probably a little bit more polarizing than I expected it to be. Polarizing free agency moves thus far in terms of signing and re-signing and extending and whatnot. But I want to talk about the draft itself because, as you know, I literally just said that it was a little bit polarizing. But I personally think that, honestly, fairly good draft class, and there were some picks there that surprised me in a good way, and there were some picks there that surprised me in a surprising way. And that's not to say they were a bad pick, but they were surprising in a way that, well, we'll get into it, right? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the first round because we've already done an episode. We did an episode on that on Saturday morning, I think it was. But we'll talk through the two first round picks they got, and then we'll talk about the later round picks that they got. So we'll start off with Jackson Smith, who was the biggest slam dunk of the picks, for obvious reasons. 14th overall is a lot easier to get right than 144th overall, let's say. Big defenseman, 6'4", shoots left. Excellent skater, excellent two-way guy, needs to develop. Going to Penn State next year, which should be interesting. Sounds like they're gonna, Penn State's gonna have a decent team, and I think that the college line is perfect for him, right? I think I wouldn't be mad if he played for the Tri-City Americans this season, had 54 points in 68 games as a defenseman. We'll probably see that production drop when he hits the NCAA. I wouldn't have been mad if he'd gone back to the WHL. Obviously, there's a lot of value in the WHL. It's, I think, the best of the three major junior leagues. I might be biased in that assessment, but I like the WHL a lot. Blue Jackets have seen a lot of strong players come from the WHL. But he's going to college. He's going the NCAA route, which means he's going to go from playing 16 to 20-year-olds to playing 18 to, I think they play up to 24 or 25 in the NCAA. There's not a lot of 25-year-olds, but there are some. So it's a really good, I think, stepping stone to go from major junior to NCAA and then probably straight to the AHL. Now, he has an early-ish birthday, I believe. No, I'm wrong. He has a late birthday, which means that he's not going to be eligible for the AHL until, I want to say, the 26-27 season or the 27-28 season. I can't do math. Basically, because he doesn't turn 20 by January 2027, he's not going to be eligible for the AHL that year. So if he was a December birthday, for example, he could play in the AHL, I think literally not next season, but the season after. So the 26-27 season. He's not AHL eligible for the 27-28 season. Even coming out of college, the restriction, I believe, is based on where you were drafted out of, if I'm not mistaken. So despite the fact that he's playing college, he's going to and playing college hockey, I do believe that because he was drafted out of the WHL, he is still held to that rule. Now, could be wrong about that, but even if I'm not, playing 2 years of college hockey is probably an extremely good thing, right? Defensemen take a little bit longer to develop. It's not like the Blue Jackets are in any rush to get their defensive prospect, for better or worse. This defense core is locked in for the next 4 years. Obviously there'll be a hole coming up when Gabranton's contract ends at the end of this year. We'll see what happens with Matejchuk. I would imagine that he will be extended, pretty sharpish. But, there's not a clear path for him to be an NHL player in 3 years, right? And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think giving him more time is almost always a good thing, right? Like, again, look at Matejchuk. He did, I believe he did 2 years in the WHL after his draft, and then came over, played the playoffs for Cleveland, started the season after that in Cleveland, and then got called up after about 20 games. Yes, he was drafted in the 2022 draft, did 2 years with Moose Jaw. When the Moose Jaw season finished, he went to the Monsters, played 4 playoff games for them, and then the next season started in the AHL with the Monsters, played 27 games with them and got called up. So, that's kind of the progression that I'm expecting from a guy like Smith. Obviously, it'd be 2 college seasons and not 2 WHL seasons, but that's about where I'm looking for Jackson Smith, and I think that's probably a good idea. Like I said, I like this pick a lot. It's the exact pick that I thought Don Waddell would go for. He loves to draft defensemen. He loves big defensemen that can skate, and Jackson Smith was the best defenseman available at the pick that they took. I was a big fan of Radim Mertka, but I'm really, really happy with the Jackson Smith pick. Now, the second first-round pick was Pyotr Andreyanov, who is a big Russian goaltender. And when I say big, I mean broad and not necessarily tall. And this was the shocker. I was like, oh, okay, they might go for a goalie here. They might go Ravensburger. Nope, the Russian. Comes very, very highly touted from the Blue Jackets goaltending coach, Nicholas Backstrom. The scouting staff loved him. Comes really highly touted by people in the know for the KHL. I think Nicholas Backstrom specifically said, he reminds me of a young Sergei Bobrovsky. And if you get a Sergei Bobrovsky out of this pick, then that's a win for me. Obviously, a while away. I believe he's under contract in the KHL until 2030. So, it's going to be 5 years before we see him, but it was going to be 5 years before we see him anyway, right? Blue Jackets goaltending, not Blue Jackets goaltending, goaltending in general is tough to predict a timeline of, and also guys take way longer to adapt than you would think, right? Just because that's how goaltending works. I believe the last big, and I'm sure I talked about that on the last episode, but I'm gonna double check. Yaroslav Askarov is the last kind of big draft pick, quote unquote, to make it into the NHL. He was drafted 11th overall in 2020. Now he's had a couple of cups of coffee with the NHL. He played in the 2022 season. He played 1 game. 2 games in the 23-24 season, played 13 games last season for the Sharks. The expectation is he's going to be a full-time NHL goalie this year, and that's 5 years after he was drafted. So do with that what you will, right? If you see a similar path of progression for Andreyanov, I'm fine with that. He is a very interesting goalie to watch. He is adventurous, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. He's very athletic. He's very reactive. Again, very, very Sergei Bobrovsky, right? Extremely solid, but does sometimes just decide that he's going to launch himself directly at the puck instead of just making the save, right? So, fun guy to watch. Don't expect to see him in North America for a while. We're talking Askarov is 23 and is making his full-time NHL campaign this season. So if that's how long it takes for Andreyanov, I'm fine with that. Goalies typically don't make an impact until they're 22, 23 anyway. So I know everyone immediately was like, oh God, 2030, that's so far away. But that's kind of just how long a goaltender takes. If they can get him over in the AHL earlier, then I imagine they will do everything they can to do that. But I'm not expecting it, and I'm also not worried about that, right? So that's the first 2 draft picks, both first-round picks. Solid value there. The Andreyanov pick was unexpected, but the more kind of video I watch of this guy, the more convinced I am that actually they might have found something here. Goalies are tough to predict anyway. I do think it was probably a toss-up between Andreyanov and Ravensbergen. I'm surprised they didn't go Ravensbergen, but they must have really, really liked what they saw in Andreyanov. So we'll see how it goes. Gonna take a quick break, and then we'll talk about the late round picks that the Blue Jackets picked up. So they had a 3rd, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th round pick, I believe. So we'll talk about all of those guys in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Monarch Money. Do you ever wish that managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch is going to put you in the driver's seat, and it's just like having your own personal CFO. It gives you full visibility and control over your finances. It's more than just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I love that I don't have to go to my banking app, to a budgeting app, to a spreadsheet, to then writing things down, to back to my banking app. I can just do it all in Monarch, which is great. And they tend to let you know if you are spending a little bit too much money on, little treats to make it through the day, which was kind of shaming, but also very helpful. Do what I did. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNHL for 50% off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's talk about the late round picks for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So originally they had the 2 first-round picks. They traded their second away in, I believe, it went to Montreal for Jordan Harris in the Patrick Laine trade. They traded their 3rd to Colorado for, among other stuff, for Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood. So they had a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th. And then I believe they traded their 4th round pick this year plus a 3rd round pick next year to move up in this draft. Which I guess they really wanted this guy, which is kind of a little bit surprising that they paid that much to draft a guy in the 3rd round. But again, they seem really, really high on this guy. So Malte Vass is a Swedish defenseman. Again, big, rangy, extremely, extremely defensive. He will not be giving you points if he can help it. In the under 20 league this season, he had 11 points in 40 games, which a quarter of a point a game is still pretty good, especially for a guy who only turned 18 in March. So he was 17 years old for much of the season and playing in the under 20 league. Now, that's kind of what you expect for a high-end European player to do, but still seems pretty good. Like I said, he's not here to give you offense. He is here to throw his weight around. Again, extremely defensive. No one is doing offense while he's on the ice if he can help it. I genuinely think that he might he had 2 goals this season. I genuinely think they might have both been by accident. Really, really aggressive play killer. Like I said, will take the puck or take the body. Is not as big. He plays a lot bigger than he is. So he's only 6'2", but I suspect he might have a little bit more growing in him. This is a great pick to just throw a dart in, right? Again, if I feel like these days there's so much emphasis on your offensive defenseman, your 2-way defenseman, right? And I feel like we've kind of moved away from that shutdown defenseman role. You've got Jacob Slavin, who is one of the best to do it. And Vladislav Gavrikov, who obviously went to New York, is another really good defensive defenseman, but they're just so much less common than the offensive guys. And I get why, that's the way the game is moving, et cetera, but you still need a shutdown guy sometimes, right? And I think they think that Vass could be that for them. It is an uninspiring pick, I think, but it is a safe pick. That's a much nicer word. It is nothing out of this world. It is just a good, solid pick, and if they get a NHL player out of him, then that is some tidy work, right? The 5th round pick is the one that really threw me. So with their 5th round pick, they picked Owen Griffin from the Oshawa Generals, which makes sense because they've been watching a ton of the Oshawa Generals this year, I would imagine, for looking at Luca Morelli purposes. Owen Griffin started the season slow and then finished it on literal fire. Had 51 points in 62 regular games and then had 29 points in 21 playoff games. Oshawa went to the OHL Championship final, lost to the London Knights, obviously, because the London Knights are inevitable at this point. Here's the kicker. He's only 5'10", which is the shortest player that, or one of the 2 shortest players that Don Waddell has drafted in his last 2 drafts. Last season, I believe the shortest player he drafted was Evan Gardner, the goalie, who was 6'2". This year, he ended up drafting 2 sub-6 foot players, which is, again, like, genuinely very shocking to me. But kid's got motor. He's smart. I've seen a lot of people comparing him to like a Gavin Brindley. He is a natural center, which helps. But he is very, very, he works hard, which sounds like kind of useless to say because obviously they all work hard, but he plays a style of game. And again, I do think Gavin Brindley is a really good comparison here is small and like, he's not necessarily going to make it your problem, but it's certainly not his problem, right? Like, sometimes you see smaller players, for example, Luca Pinelli is a really good example of this, yes, he's small, and that's your problem now. He is going to get in your face about it. He is not going to turn down a fight. And he's gonna make it your problem. Owen Griffin is not necessarily gonna make it your problem, but it's also just super not his problem, right? He's just gonna play his game. He doesn't shy away from the physicality, but he is just really good at he's really good at the little things, and is just a ton of fun to watch. I'm really, really expecting him to pop this season. The way it took him a while to get his feet under him. And his D-1 year, he was not very good at all. 6 points in 61 games in his D-1 year. That was his U17 year as well, in fairness. So this season, again, he only just turned 18 in April. So played most of the season as a 17-year-old. 51 points in 62 games once he got his feet under him, and then it just exploded in the playoffs. So if he hits the ground running, I'm expecting a big year from Griffin. And I think this team is as well, especially it should bode extremely well for Griffin that he was drafted by Don Waddell despite being 5'10", right? And I know that that's kind of become a little bit of a running joke of, Waddell only likes big bodies. But if, you look at his draft history with Columbus so far, the fact that he could have very easily taken another big guy here, and it was like, no, we want Owen Griffin, whether that's pressure from the scouting department or what. But this was a guy as well that got a lot of praise from both public and team scouts. So a lot of when I say public scouts, I mean, guys like Tony Ferrari, Will Scouch, my colleague Sebastian High at Locked On NHL Prospects, those guys were really high on him. And also the TV analysts on ESPN, Sportsnet, whatever you were watching, they were also really high on Griffin. He was a guy that fell in the draft, again, I think because of his size more than anything. So a really, really solid late pickup. If he doesn't turn into anything but a great role player for the Cleveland Monsters in a couple of years, that's what you get with a 5th round pick, right? But if you can get what I think might be a 3rd line forward, that's great value there, right? And an extremely un-Don Waddell-like pick. So that to me that means more, I think. I feel pretty good about. I feel really good about Owen Griffin, actually. Granted, I'm biased because that's the exact kind of player archetype I like, but it's the fact that it's the player archetype that Don Waddell doesn't like, and he picked him anyway, that I think bodes well. If his skating and compete and everything can overpower the lack of size, that's probably a pretty good sign for his longevity in this organization if his development stays on track. Which, once you hit the 3rd round, player drafting and prospects kind of become you just kind of throw darts and see what happens. This was a pretty good dart to hit a pretty good dart to throw and hit the player. I lost control of my metaphor there. But I feel pretty good about the Owen Griffin pick. We're going to take another really quick break, and then when we get back, we'll talk about the 6th and 7th round picks that the Blue Jackets took. And that's when we really get into dart throwing territory. So we'll do that in just a second. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about the draft, which the Blue Jackets did shockingly well in. Maybe I should be less visibly surprised that the Blue Jackets did a good job drafting, but they got some good value in the higher picks. They're what we would consider premium picks. They're mid-round picks. They got some decent value and also some like standard value, I would say. Like I would consider Vass like he went about where he's supposed to go and is a player that he's supposed to be, right? Griffin fell in the draft and I think has better value than a 5th round selection. Let's talk about the 6th round pick, who is Victor Hedin Raftheim. Another Swedish defenseman, another big guy, 6'4". Not the best skater. He's got a really weird skating style, actually. Like he's so efficient in a way that looks extremely inefficient, which again is kind of a surprising pick from Waddell, who is a guy that likes smooth, fluid skaters. Raftheim is not that. He is, I guess, a two-way defenseman. Like he's not a shutdown guy necessarily. He's not an offensive guy necessarily. He feels like a good guy where, again, not a lot is going to happen, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? He feels like a guy that you only really notice when mistakes are being made. Is very young. Doesn't turn 18 until nearly the end of August. So it's when you get to the 6th and 7th rounds, like sometimes the best thing you can do is just throw a dart at a young raw player and see what happens. And that seems to be what they've done with Raftheim. Is he's very, very young. He's very, very raw. Can the Blue Jackets development team, headed by Rick Nash, do what they have done with a handful of other prospects, right? And I say handful sounds derogatory, but like the Blue Jackets development program, I think, has done a really solid job with the prospects that have made it to the NHL so far, right? Can they do the same with Raftheim? Like that's what they're betting on. He had 4 points in 34 games in the under 20 league in Sweden this year, which again, playing in the under 20 league as a 17-year-old is impressive all by itself. He, I believe, has been playing under 18 since he was 15 again as well. So, when you're good, you tend to play up a couple of age groups. And so it's a good sign that seems to be what's happening. Again, I'm not expecting points, but there's something there. And if it can be molded, there's something there. He's active, but not in a way that I think he's going to be a really good second assist guy. I feel like he's going to be a guy that you're like, man, he hasn't scored in 20 games. What's gone on? And then you look and you're like, oh, because he's got 12 secondary assists in those 20 games. So that's kind of how I feel about Raftheim. Again, very, very raw, but there could be something there. The final pick I want to talk about, the 7th round pick. This was another surprise. Jeremy Loranger, who I'm probably mispronouncing because my Quebecois French is not good, is 5'9", 198th overall by the Blue Jackets. Is another young player in the draft, only just turned 18 a couple of weeks before the draft. He's another guy that popped. He played in the BCHL this season, which is, I would guess, similar-ish to the USHL. It's the step, players typically go from the BCHL and then jump to the CHL. He's committed to the University of Nebraska Omaha next season, so another player that's going to the NCAA. But he had 105 points in the BCHL this year, which I believe led the entire BCHL in scoring, which is genuinely very, very impressive. Yeah, he had almost 30 points more. No, he had 20. I can't do math. The second place had 87 and he had 105. So what's that? 18 points more than second place. Genuinely Very, very, very impressive. Again, kind of a dartboard pick, but another surprising one from Don. Another one that scouts have talked about in terms of like, he's a guy that could be a sleeper pick. I don't think anyone was arguing for him to go in the second or third round or whatever. He was always going to be like a mid to late round pick, but good value to get him in the seventh. Especially, like leading the BCHL in scoring is not the same as leading like the WHL in scoring, for example, right? But it's a really, really solid foundation. I'll be interested to see what he does at the University of Omaha, Nebraska, because that is not necessarily Nebraska Omaha, excuse me. That is not a team that is known for it's not a team that is known for its like NHL prospect, right? Last season they had 4 NHL prospects on their roster. Next season they'll have at least 1 in Loranger, but I don't believe Noah Ellis is also there. Or excuse me, this season. I forgot how dates work. My point being here is that it's not a hotbed of NHL talent, right? It's not the University of Michigan. It's not the University of Wisconsin, Minnesota, BCBU. Like, it's not a university like that, which might work in his favor, because if he can be the guy at the University of Nebraska Omaha, that to me will probably do like a world of good for his confidence. And, if he can have a really good season there, maybe he transfers to somewhere else. Maybe he takes that next step, right? Like there's something there's something there in him as a prospect that I'm really, really excited to see. I don't know that he ever turns into an NHL player, but I would be really, really interested to see what his ceiling is, because if he continues to develop, continues to pop, there's definitely a player there, which will be really, really interesting to see. And I'm excited about it. Again, I'm biased. He is the kind of player that I like in terms of their like player profile. But once again, kind of like the Griffin pick, the fact that he was picked by Waddell, who typically looks at big, smooth skating players, is seems a pretty good sign for Loranger. So all in all, I'm really happy with this draft class. I think there's some curveballs in there. I think they got some good value with their late picks. I think they did a good job with their first round. Andreyanov may not have been the player that I think I would have picked, or that a lot of people expected them to pick. But again, if they're high on him, and again, the more footage of him that I watch, the more I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like there's something there. Again, I only really know enough about like prospect analysis and goaltending to make me dangerous, but I don't know zero. So he's going to be really interesting to watch. I'm excited to see what happens next season, whether he can make it into the KHL, or whether he, does some time in the VHL. I believe it is their AHL league. So we'll see. All in all, pretty good draft. Not mad about it. That's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, what I think we'll do is take a look at the Blue Jackets roster as it stands and try to figure out what the optimal lineup is, because barring a surprise, I think the roster that they have at the minute is going to be the roster that they go into the season with. I know that they're trying to add a goalie. Obviously, we'll add Dmitry Voronkov in there, assuming that they get the contract sorted there. But it sounds like they're done adding new players beyond trying to get a goalie to split time between the NHL and the AHL. So we'll see how it goes. We will try to figure out what the best lineup is. Obviously, the defense is probably going to be much the same as it was last season, but there's some interesting tweaks that I think they could make with the forward group that could help players continue to take steps forward. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. Thank you for listening, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter and LO-Blue Jackets on Blue Sky. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.